one of the young women was in college and she came up and she said to her mother, "Mom, I have fetal alcohol." And she says, "Honey, you can't have fetal alcohol. I don't drink. I've never drank." And she said, "But Mom, we've been to geneticists and they could never figure out what it is." And she said, when Liz is telling me what's going on with her life and how she thinks, she said, "I'm maybe not that extreme, but it's how I think and it's how I react. Did you ever drink?" And she said, "No, honey, I didn't drink." And later on, the mom came running to me and she said, "Jody, I drank." And she said, "No, you need to understand this. My brother got married in New York and I got drunk and I didn't know I was pregnant. And it was exactly the time that you were explaining the face would have been formed. And that's the genetics that my daughter has."
Welcome, Team Meliorist, back to the mics, living with FASD. So good to sit down with all of you again.
Thanks for having us, Patty.
So, we as a foursome always like to tackle some interesting ideas that maybe people aren't conversating about in their daily lives. And so, hopefully, today's conversation will be a repeat of that this will be something new to think about and consider. And it kind of came about from just thinking about our kids and thinking about what started this all. There's the stigma against women who drink during pregnancy, but it's not the women who did the damage. It's the alcohol itself.
The alcohol.
And how this toxin, this neurotoxin, is different from all the others. So what are your thoughts?
It has an exempt status that the others don't enjoy. If you think about industries that have obvious toxin effects on society, they are more and more being held accountable for the harm footprint that they create. And somehow, if we look at what happened with the tobacco industry, for example, but somehow alcohol has a very, very powerful lobby, more powerful even than the NRA in the American government. It's very, very powerful. And they've been able to manipulate their way around things so that they have enjoyed a special status.
Internationally, the liquor industry is one of the biggest businesses there is. I mean, the weapons industry, the oil industry. I mean, the liquor industry is right up there. And it's like,
Right.
It's given powers that it really doesn't deserve. But it's like, I'm really stressed. I need a drink. It's like this drink is going to bring, we know it can numb our brains a little bit and make us not as aware, but it doesn't have a power to heal. And
It's our
kind of
biggest,
like
it's our biggest quick medication.
Mhm.
It's our biggest quick, cheap medication. It's a relationship that goes back before Big Pharma.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems to be used as a panacea for all things, right? It's a social lubricant. It transfers our wallflower status, at the edge of the room into being socially confident. It's portrayed in commercials as this elixir that will make us more sociable, more attractive, more sexy, and
More fun. Oh, more fun.
yeah. And it just seems to be, it's used to drown our sorrows. It's used to numb our grief. It's used to celebrate. I can't think of a social function that does not include alcohol.
And it's like, well, the liquor industry itself, through their giant advertisement machine, has put set like the mommy needs wine. That wine, that's all liquor industry sponsored. That's advertisement. Mommy
Is that
doesn't need wine.
wine?
There's a whole movement. Mommy needs wine. I know. And it's like, it's used in sexual abuse. It's used for all those other things. Candy's dandy, but liquor's quicker, right? You've heard that. Yeah. And so you think of all the ways that alcohol is used, but it has a sacred status, like it's a sacred brew, and it's not. It's just a drink. It's like it doesn't really have all those other powers. It numbs us out, so we miss important things and make decisions that we might not make if we were sober.
It's used in hazing rituals, like inducting young adults into fraternities and sororities.
Well, it is a ritual transition between childhood and adulthood even.
Yeah. It's part of business meetings. It's part of conferences.
It's part of business agreements and war agreements as well.
So here's a romance piece of alcohol. We at our wedding, my husband's and my wedding, my parents had been sober for about a year, which was just an incredible thing. So we decided that we didn't want to have alcohol at our wedding, and that's when we got a square dance caller to call our wedding, because then they could have chili and food and fun and apple cider or whatever, and everybody learned to everyone learned to square dance because we brought a square dance instructor. So there are ways to get around it if you
They're
and to honor the people that are really walking the path of sobriety, which is a choice. They've made a huge choice.
It is a choice.
I look at our daughter who went from not drinking at all to drinking a glass of vodka. Now, we would mix the glass of vodka, but she knew she should only keep it to one glass, so she got herself a 16-ounce glass and poured vodka in it. And yeah, 4.8 blood alcohol. So from that point on, she went to drinking every day, a liter a day. I mean, it happened in a week. She went from not drinking at all to drinking a liter a week, and she said it tasted like milk. Now, the interesting thing was the mother during foster care would pump her breasts to bring her milk to the baby at foster care.
The birth mom, while your daughter was in foster care, the birth mom was pumping milk, but she was drinking. And so she was getting it postnatally.
And so when Liz got the alcohol, she felt it was a comfort food for her. It was a loving comfort food. So she drank for 3 years. And when she decided to go sober, she was sober 15 years. 15 years before she passed away. That is a huge steps. I guess anybody that's listening, I want to encourage them that, that choice is tough.
It's always possible.
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Because in years ago, treatment centers didn't accept pregnant women. So
a lot of them still don't. Yeah.
Women were drinking during pregnancy. They were turned away from hospital-based and center, residential center-based treatment programs. Even sometimes turned away from outpatient because of the liability issue.
Insurance issues.
Research and demonstration project I worked in that was hospital-based, where we had pregnant and postpartum women. We had them for a year, but it's not common that women can find supports in sobriety like people can.
I remember doing an episode.
Very little available.
I remember doing an episode with Dr. Susan Rich, who helped found a shelter for women who needed to get off the alcohol, but they were helped through that process in that program. It was novel down in North Carolina. And now I think, if I remember correctly, there are several down there now. But I was few and far between.
I was part of the Ms. Foundation for Women's first ever funding of a women's 12-step support center that had childcare available for women. We had that funding for 3 years. And because in typical 12-step environments, there was no childcare. So young moms who were single moms had no way to get to women's recovery meetings or participate. And many were domestic violence survivors, sexual abuse. And to sit in meetings with the large percentage of the people in the room being male, when you're raw and you're afraid and you're trying to hold it together to get off of alcohol or other drugs, and the sensations of vulnerability are enormously high.
It's just too risky to be vulnerable.
Very, very challenging. It can be done. It can be done. I promise you, it can be done.
There's another support recovery program, support group, sponsored and founded by Kathy Mitchell, who has the most powerful recovery story I've ever heard in my life. And she's a star. I think she's one of the greatest lights on our planet. I have my ultimate respect. But she has for several years, been running this program called it's Warrior Women's. And you could probably Google it, or we can somehow put on this link of information on how to. She's founded by her for women who drank when they were pregnant and are now in struggling, getting sober, supporting each other. And it's amazing. And she's an amazing role model. So I was going to say for a period of time, I was living in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory in Canada. And I was a director of the Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Society of the Yukon, which is a society that was developed to support adults, or they say adults, living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And it was just to provide ongoing daily support. It was still an amazing program. Anyway, we were every year on International FAS Day on September 9th, they would have a get together, a barbecue, invite the community, introduce them all to the adults they were working with, and everyone got together and celebrated their work and sobriety. At this one, when I was there, they came up with, some of the adults we were working with came up with this amazing idea, and we did it during that year for people to stay sober as an honor to support women who were pregnant, as a recognition of the damage and change that was done to people's brain throughout the Yukon by prenatal alcohol exposure, and just to recognize the enormity of the issue and support people in sobriety. So we started through basically theoretically 9 months, starting in September, ending on Mother's Day in May. And so people at that, we got out, we just did this kind of spontaneously at this barbecue. I got out a big paper poster board and people just signed their names. So they signed their names on a public list that I'm going to be sober, whether or not, if they were already sober, they donated the next 9 months of their life to this sobriety, to this life. If they were struggling, they signed up, and it was a public list. And we got together every trimester for a get together. We had people as far away as New York in the U.S. hear about it and called and said, I put my name on the list. We had legislators in British Columbia say, call my name, put my name on the list. We had someone in West Virginia. We had people all over Canada. And it was so amazing. But when we got together to have the conversations about it, this was before Zoom was a thing. It's going back a few years. We'd get together and have phone calls. We'd have a radio program. The radio stations would come when we'd have our get together. And we'd talk about during the first trimester, and people would share their struggles. I know we had a young couple that were pregnant, and she was newly sober. They were newly sober, and they would talk about. But what happened during these several months that this was going on, is we saw how interwoven alcohol is in our society. For example, one of the employees with FASD was a nurse, and she called me one Saturday morning and said, I have to tell you, I can't believe I did this. Last night we had a big family get together. I had a glass of wine. I didn't realize, oh my gosh. And I said, you don't have to confess. I said, it's about the conversation. And she said, but I just feel so bad. I didn't even realize it. I just drank it without, and didn't even think about it till now. And she didn't have a problem with alcohol. It was just a family get together. They always had wine. She had it. And I said, see how easy it is?
It didn't even register.
It didn't even register. And
there it is.
So see how easy it is for a woman who's pregnant to go, oh my gosh, last night, oh my gosh. And so we just, and I know this one couple, this man came and stopped by my office and said, my wife and I are having a really difficult time with this. He said, we don't drink except for every Friday night at the end of our work week. We buy a bottle of wine and we go out, we share our week. It's our intimate time to kind of catch up with everything we haven't caught up with during the week. And it's really precious to us.
It's it's how they reset.
I said,
yeah.
I remember saying, well, I'm not your judge. This is about the conversations and talking about it. And whatever you decide is your decision. But just look at how interwoven it is in our society.
So
Deb,
you've inspired me, Deb.
Spontaneously.
So I have a story that I think I want to share. I was at a conference, and this was in Kentucky, and Liz was in her, I think you remember this conference. Lizzie blew up the conference because she was just herself, and the professionals couldn't handle who she was, and the parents were all rallying around us saying, this is so wonderful. We finally got somebody expressing what we deal with every day. But one of the young women was in college, and she came up and she said to her mother, Mom, I have fetal alcohol. And she says, honey, you can't have fetal alcohol. I don't drink. I've never drank. And she said, but Mom, we've been to geneticists and they could never figure out what it is. And she said, when Liz is telling me what's going on with her life and how she thinks, she said, I'm maybe not that extreme, but it's how I think and it's how I react, even though I have the self-control to handle it. She said, "Did you ever drink?" And she said, "No, honey, I didn't drink." And later on, the mom came running to me and she said, "Jody, I drank." I go, Okay." And she said, "No, you need to understand this. My brother got married in New York and I got drunk and I didn't know I was pregnant. And it was exactly the time that you were explaining the face would have been formed. And that's the genetics that my daughter has. It's not." And so it affected her. I never drank before. I never drank after. But that piece, my daughter's right. And what was
Mm.
interesting is her daughter really became friends with Liz because she was curious. Now she was older, and Liz was, I
Mm.
think, 17 or 16, but she was very curious on, how do you think and how do you deal with that? And just trying to put it into her own life experience, into her own body culture.
Yeah.
That
It's so powerful. When I was in the facets training, learning about FASD for the sake of the kids and families I supported in my job, as I recognized bits and pieces and challenges and struggles throughout my life. But oh God, especially during those difficult transitional years as a young adult, just figuring it out made so much sense. And bits of reframing continue to settle in. Even it's been 6 years since I first identified that I was on the spectrum. But what I was going to say, Deb, you have inspired me. I have
Uh-oh.
begun
Watch
to
out.
watch out,
Just that.
Williston, North Dakota, because I have begun planning my 5K for September 9th. It's a long way away, but planning an event is so complicated. And you've inspired me to add in this challenge of after you've listened to me talk, would you consider
Yes.
taking a vow to go through Mother's Day abstinent,
Right.
people who have been affected?
And then getting together during each trimester and having a celebration or having a conversation.
Having a conversation. Just having a conversation, like Deb is saying. Because if it's
It's
just
all about it really
conversation-
is all about the conversations and people's own lives. And we're definitely not trying to go out and hold the flag, and we're not trying to do that, because everyone's lives are their own choices. It's just having the conversation and bringing it out of hidden whispers. And so by the way, after that moved back to the United States after that period of time with that job in the Yukon, and I tried to do the same thing in my local community, and no, people wouldn't. They said, "Well, after the holidays, we could start after Christmas. So we could start." And so we never did do it, but it was like the whole purpose was to do it before the holidays.
Of
Right.
course.
And it's part of it was standing with men and women who were having babies at that time, standing with the women who were staying sober.
Yep.
And just to be, we're all together. We got your back,
It is true that when people step away from the norm of what the celebration or the general process is, whether it's meet every so often in a pub, whether it's, the family always has this with that meal, whatever the norm is, where alcohol is already embedded somehow.
right.
Being able to stand apart from that does create a sense that a person is deviating, if you will, is apart from the norm. And there is kind of like an invisible glass wall between them and the other people. And it is a very real experience. People can be disowned from their families over these issues.
So often we have to justify our choice to be abstinent.
And we never have to justify the choice to drink, or the ways that we do are so typical. I had a bad day. Well, it's raining. The weather's really bad and I'm kind of blue. Well, it was a hard day at work. Or, well, we're having a celebration. I mean, all of the
Oh my God, I got so angry.
right. I'm to drink or use it feelings, whatever. And it's not that everybody does it. Everybody does that. It's just that some people do it and pay a different price when they do that. And particularly if they're pregnant, and who's paying the price is the mom and the baby. And that's the part that isn't in the calculation around the justifications we all know and love, which are just part of normal society. not just in the United States and Canada, but all around the world. It's very, very typical. So because those are group activities, to do anything different than what the group is doing always creates a kind of a tension in humans, because we're very driven by, where the group is going. But where's the group going? We tend to become driven that way.
And I think part of it too is the lack of awareness of fetal development, right?
Here we
Because
go.
as adults, we're sober again within a few hours,
That's right.
right? Especially if we were drinking while we were eating a meal,
Mhm.
right? Then we don't feel intoxicated for very long. So we tend to think it was just a short thing for the baby. Baby will be fine. But even though the baby forms its liver at the end of by the end of the first month, not the enzymes that break alcohol down. Those don't come into play until late in the 8th month.
There we go.
So that alcohol remains in the baby for a long
Acetaldehyde
Much
sitting in
time.
their system, and it is deadly.
So the mother's sober, the baby's still drunk, and that alcohol is still causing damage to that baby's developing cells.
Right.
I think this is a very critical point you brought up, Patty, because honestly, if that were common knowledge, besides just the effects of looking at one another as adults and seeing, are they drunk or not? If that was understood, if people could see what was going on in that gestation as easily as they can look at one another and show concern if someone appears to have overindulged, it would change things a lot in a group if that could be visually seen, but it's not seen. And it isn't seen by women who are ingesting either. I go back to this study, actually in Ira Chasnoff's study. Part of how he was doing the studies there was a center where there were women who were participating in his study, and some of the staff at the center invited women to draw themselves and their baby. And these were women who were in a recovery program. And they drew the baby outside of their own body. So there was a disconnect already in the women between who they were and who this is, which is very interesting, because that disconnect also, it says a lot.
And yet at the same time, I can find a positive in that, insofar as those women are identifying that the baby is his or her own person.
At least there is this. I don't know if that's what they're identifying. What I know is their experience is that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect.
For women that have gone through a lot of trauma and sexual abuse, sexual assault, women that are, heaven forbid, having to carry a baby from sexual assault,
from rape,
that's very, very common.
Very common.
And so often we don't look at all the other factors involved in a woman's deciding her ability to be sober during pregnancy. Whatever.
We rarely talk about trauma. We immediately assume the woman is an addict.
Who's a researcher in South Dakota, who's produced some studies and written papers on the level of trauma that a lot of mothers having given birth to a child with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, the level of emergency room visits and damage done to their body before they were pregnant. And it just shows some of the other factors, and this trauma is a big one.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's massive. And it was recognized in certain efforts to create women-centric treatment modalities. For example, those in Boston, I visited them in the 90s. So there were researchers I was following. And because I was working in the research program at Emmanuel Hospital, and then later with the other program, I went and I visited those centers to see what they were doing compared to what we were doing, and to try and understand the range of things they were doing to support women and their children, because they would involve the children in the mechanism of trying to get life back on track, rather than keeping it completely separate, keeping children completely out of it. And they were beginning to look, and because it was in Boston, they were beginning to look at the issue of fetal alcohol.
How long ago was that, Antonio?
In the 90s, the 1990s.
So 20 years after the discovery.
And now we're way more than fetal alcohol syndrome was named in 1973, and we're a lot of years past that. I had a young woman move into my neighborhood a couple of months ago, house sitting, young single mom with a 6-week-old baby, who's house sitting one of our neighbors, live in Alaska, and one of our neighbors houses for the winter, and she and her new baby. And one of my other neighbors was talking to her and telling her about the people in the neighborhood, and who she's going to want to meet, and you can go to this person for this and that kind of thing. And she mentioned my name, and she talked about I was very involved in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and this young woman said, "What's that?" And so we think that this information is widely known. It's really not. Well, and so my friend, who's an emergency room nurse, started telling her about, and she said, a woman's face as she told the story. There's some support work we're going to need to do there, because she said,
everything changed.
The color just drained from her face, right?
Yeah, yes. And so she's holding this beloved baby, and face has gone pale. And so we will provide support, but it is atrocious that she's never even heard it. Like her doctors, her nurses that she worked with didn't help make sure that she was staying sober, didn't help explain it. She's never even.
They don't ask.
And if you're in these, you may not have your period every once in a while. And so and you're living your life, and your kids are already 18, 19, and
you're still having periods.
And then 5 months in, you find out you're 5 months pregnant. Well, that is, like, now where do I go from there? And you've got a responsible job, and those are things that can happen. Plus, a woman cannot have their period for 3 months and be pregnant, or have her period all 3 months and still be pregnant. Maybe lighter, a little different, but
yeah. When I was in nursing school, they said that happens to 1/3 of pregnancies.
That's incredible.
Women continue to cycle for several months.
Well, this may be too much information to share, but I'm one of those women. I have 3 children, and I had my children in the 70s, a long, long time ago. And all 3 times, I didn't know I was pregnant right away. I had no indication, except for I got really, really sick. And all 3 times, I thought I had a very bad flu. By the 3rd time, I thought, I think I recognize this flu. So some of us are slower than others, but that happened to me. And I was just fortunate that alcohol wasn't part of my life, because I would have drunk. I mean, of course I would have.
Well, and
I didn't. Yeah. I wasn't any wise person or anything.
Even if you choose not to drink. I mean, when Lizzie was so sick, I made the choice, because I came home one night and I thought, I could use a drink. And I'd made the promise to myself when I left a home that had alcoholism, that if I ever said that was my line in the sand.
Wow.
And so I said, okay, that's my line in the sand. I just told myself I needed a drink. If I need a drink, I don't get to drink. And so I took 2 years off of any alcohol, and eventually was with some friends, and they'd good friends, and they'd picked a special bottle of wine, and they had all kinds of appetizers, and they'd done it special for me, and they didn't know that I made a 2-year commitment. And so I broke my sobriety at that point. And I was mature enough in the trauma and the pain to have dealt with it, and to then continue on and say, hey, if I was pregnant, that could have made a difference. And yet that was because I wanted to honor the people that brought the wonderful thing to me, right? With their hearts.
And that's another aspect that we should probably cover in our conversation, is that, if we are not capable of childbearing, then what's wrong with drinking? In moderation, of course, because addiction's no fun, no matter what your circumstances. We need to avoid that. But people who are in this FASD awareness movement are not necessarily advocating that the culture become teetotalers.
Exactly. That's what I mean about, there are people with whom alcohol makes a bad romance, and other people who never have a problem with it. And that makes it harder for society at large to say, well, how much harm and where is the harm? And are alcohol-related deaths from drunk driving, is that enough harm? Are problems that children live with then for the rest of their lives, is that enough harm? How do we then pick a stance as a culture, as a society around that stuff? And so it isn't a black and white situation until it becomes really clearly so detrimental that entire communities are being flattened as a result of it, which is why when those communities rise up and say, in our situation, we don't want the marketing and the heavy hand of the alcohol lobby running what happens to us.
No, that's
As
a
what happens.
perfect segue into a teaser for a future episode. Jody and Deb, you were both involved, and you also, Antonia, tangentially, in supporting a community who did just that.
One of the most powerful experiences of my entire life was being involved in the White Clay movement to close down the liquor store. It's in White Clay, Nebraska, on the edge of Pine Ridge Reservation, where there were 4 liquor stores selling over 1 million cans of low-cost, high-octane alcohol to Pine Ridge Reservation for the sole purpose of that. And it's quite a powerful story, and we'll share it later with a couple of other guest speakers who were involved in it. And yes, so it's one of the most amazing experiences I've been fortunate to be involved with in my entire life.
And it was
Shows the
a
power.
story that spanned several decades,
Oh, yes.
but did have a happy ending.
It shows what a small group of people getting together can change the world. What is it Margaret Mead said? Never underestimate or don't believe that a small group of people can't change the world, because it, in fact, is the only thing that ever really has. So the power of people getting together, and I think in this days in the U.S., around the world, sometimes we forget what we can do as people coming together. We could share information, we can change the world. We can change our own lives. And by doing that, help change spread hope to other people.
And
Not that we're in charge.
And one characteristic that so many of us with FASD share is our tenacity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we're bulldogs when we get on something, and that can be frustrating to our parents when we were young, sure, but it can also be an incredible strength if harnessed correctly.
Right. Look at Red Shoes Rock. Look at what that movement has done. It's reached all around the world.
Well, and it gave joy. We needed something that wasn't, oh, pity me, oh, we're victims, oh, we're survivors. We are living a life just like everyone else. As Lizzie said to me, and I keep bringing her in because she's just such a part of me still, but she said, Mom, how can I be disabled? I was born like this. I can't have a disability if I'm born like it. I just am. And I think that is the reality. We just are. And so whatever we are, we are. And we learn to adapt and to mold ourselves into society however best we can. And it just works. It just works. So yeah.
It's very medicinal for society. It's very medicinal. That's why I included in PYP, I included Deb's voice about the Hopi prophecy, because it was foretold.
Okay, you can't tease us like that. What was the Hopi prophecy?
And we've used it in the new book Deb's doing, which is 13 Moonbeams. And I'm really excited about that. That's why we're here together in Minnesota instead of Alaska and Minnesota, because we can sit by our wood stove instead of her wood stove and have my big computers and produce this new book. And
it'll be out in January.
Yeah. And
13 Beams of Moonlight.
Argue about points and language and, is this clear enough for the layperson? Is this clear enough for the layperson in Southern Florida or New York City or in the Inuit in Alaska? Is it clear enough
or anywhere, everywhere?
Yes. And is it clear enough for individuals with FASD, parents, and can they apply it? Can they apply this to help educate, to help build
Can
neurons?
this story touch another person?
Yeah. I mean, thank God we now have neuroplasticity as a reality. When I was writing Our Fascinating Journey, people were arguing with me that this wasn't possible. And then when I put in it was a brain injury, they were like, you can't say that. Well, now it's part of our FASD culture, but somebody has to say it. And I'm hoping all of our books that we've just done now, we're saying the things on the edge of what we've learned over 40 years each or 45 years, and that we're moving that next generation to that place where they can take what we've learned, and adapt it to whatever happens in society, that they can adapt it in ways that we couldn't because they have what we learned.
Yeah, I think, and I cannot include myself in the category of first generation at FASD advocates because I'm just 6 years in. But the three of you have been in this space for decades.
We're tired,
And
so we're giving it to the next generation.
yeah, yeah. And chronologically, I'm not that far behind you guys. So I consider this legacy work for me also. But you have tremendous wisdom, which is why I keep bringing you back onto the podcast. But this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I'm so glad you were able to carve some time away from writing.
We're having fun.
Yeah. I can't wait to see the finished book. And I
You
can't.
guys will get it for a review before
book.
anybody else does. So yeah.
It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book. It's going to blow doors.
Well, I know, Antonio, you and Deb had been working on it a while this autumn or this summer as
Well,
well. So
Deb has put so much together for such a long period of time. I'm rereading two very, very cherished books, Fantastic Anton Succeeds and Fantastic Anton Grows Up. And a lot of people in the current environment, in the current FASD space, don't know about those books. But they're really, really great. And they foretold an awful lot of the pathways that people find and about the processes that are supportive. And I think what's exciting about 13 Beams of Moonlight, which is Deb's book that's coming out, is that really the things that we all learned when we think about what FASD is about learning. It's about learning who another person is, them learning who they are, how they are, what works for them, us being alongside. It's about learning for everybody. And it changes our lives. It changes our lives.
and when
And
we have that
changes,
attitude,
it changes culture.
yeah, when we have that attitude of insatiable curiosity about people and the way they are and what makes them tick and what's helpful, if we have that attitude with everybody, then we cannot help but embrace neurodiversity.
We luckily have neurodiversity because culture can't keep being monoculture. That's not good. That's not good for anyone.
And I think we showed that in our first book, which was Embracing Zach, was that a community of compassion is a powerful force. And that when we join together and we embrace people with neurodiversity, and I'm including veterans that have post-traumatic stress that are coming back from wherever they are, first responders that have trauma, autism, ADHD, FASD, any epilepsy,
Social
anything
workers
where
have
we have
secondary trauma.
dementia. Any of those things where our brain is been changed for whatever reason, a tumor on our brain, that the community, when they embrace it as, okay, the person's not the same if it's a person that's had an injury, but they're still the person, and we see each other as human beings, and we see each other as quality human beings that can contribute to society and to the community in ways that matter: love, support, laughter. Those things, yeah, we can make a difference. And that's where the romance needs to be. And I don't mean that's where the romance needs to be. It needs to be in the community, and alcohol lubricates that, but that's not the real romance. The real romance is reaching across to your neighbor and reaching across to your community to walk together, regardless of who you are. We aren't all going to get along, but there are ways and common things that we can do together that maybe we lay down our differences so that those important things in a community can be accomplished. And that's what I hope Embracing Zach can do is open up eyes where that's not such a weirdo. That's kind of a really cool person. Just
and
to
to-
get
In
that.
fact, it works better. In fact, it works better. Having the differences makes everything better.
realize that we have so much more in common as humanity than those superficial characteristics that separate us.
Don't you think that the Meliorists have figured that out with ourselves? I mean, there's not one of us that's the same. We are all we all may be getting grayer and whiter hair as we go, but we are all so different and come from different backgrounds and experiences and cultures. I mean, it's just been fascinating to get to know each other and realize how much the same we are, and bringing in our thoughts from different perspectives, so that the final pieces that we do, the final writing we do, the final speaking we do is solid. It honors people. It honors humanity. And that I think is something that the differences bring together that we can't bring it to the table by ourselves. Yeah.
Well, on that note, ladies, I'm going to thank you for joining me today on Living with FASD.
Awesome. Thanks, Patty.
I hope you found today's candid conversation to be enjoyable, hopefully humorous. Definitely, I hope you found it valuable in terms of adding to the depth and breadth of your knowledge about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. It is my honor and great pleasure to bring more perspectives and more information to you week by week. I want to thank you for being a valuable part of this podcast family. And please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you follow me on, so that more people can discover the show and learn more about FASD in the process. If you want to reach out to today's guest, please check the show notes for their contact information, any links that they provided for me to share with you. Also, there will be links for the things that I have to offer. For instance, any professional development training or community organization training that you might be interested in ranging for, or coaching services for yourself as a neurodivergent adult or as a parent of a little, please check out my website at patriciacasper.com. And if you want to pick up a copy of my book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with Adults Living with FASD, you can do so at books.by/yourfasdcoach or on Amazon. Okay, that is a wrap. I want to thank you again for showing up week after week. I hope you really enjoyed today's candid conversation, and we'll see you next time. Take care.